Greetings and salutations, friends. I'm Evelyn Levette, here with a DeviantArt video that's only about 2 years late. Not to worry, I've got a style of video I haven't seen often before. In fact, I've noticed that a lot of art review videos are impersonal and have a point-and-laugh style of comedy that isn't always helpful when the artist is looking for genuine critique. So I decided I would talk to several different artists to figure out what they were specifically looking for to help improve their art. Those specifics will be shown here on No Cynicism, Just Criticism. I'll be starting off with Foxy Tina Redfur, also known as Jeannie, who draws art seen often on DeviantArt, such as furries, character asks, and since this is October, Inktober art. Jeannie also uploads traditional classwork, which show a good development of the fundamentals of art, with her first few assignments having much of the line work evenly defined, working against the form of the pieces. The blending is also poor, while the contrast manages to be too low. However, the pieces from week 14 and 15 show a much better grasp of contrast, and the ear especially captures this with the line art being thinner in lighter areas. The skeleton feet are much the same. Her self-portrait shows an attempt at harsher shading, but it looks more deliberate than her early classwork, therefore it is likely a stylistic choice. The hair could use some more contrast, and the hat being smaller than her head and also unfinished is distracting, but this is classwork, so she likely didn't have time to finish it. I believe the biggest strength of her classwork is how it pushes her to try new things. These gesture drawings, while suffering from anatomy mistakes in the arms and this one's breast, are much more relaxed than her other artwork. For example, most of her furry art, whether traditional or digital, appears to have two face types, 3/4 view with a blocky muzzle, or head-on with a style that was likely referenced from Looney Tunes and then kept as a mental guideline. There's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from other art, and having so much fan art of the characters makes it understandable that she uses the art style. But I believe it's important to eventually branch out in your own way, maybe even combining multiple pre-existing styles. Having this be her main inspiration for her art style limits the character's expressive possibilities and makes same-face syndrome present throughout her furry art. There are some subtle differences in these pieces, but almost have the opposite problem. The shapes are now too rounded, giving the muzzle a similar appearance to Snoopy, but not exaggerating other aspects of the style to make it fit. And the messy coloring and line work, while visually interesting, does not appear to fit the feel of her furry characters. However, she also draws humans on occasion, and these will typically have more interesting designs, poses, and expressions. While experimentation with poses is seen in some of the furry art, there appears to be much less of it in the time just before and during her classwork uploads. Going back to her Inktober art, 2018 appears to be a time when she was experimenting much more with poses and character interactions. Looking at 2019, however, her Inktober art is very different thematically. While there are some colorful pieces, many of the entries are a dramatic black and white that are stylistically similar to logos and other graphic design. Due to this, her characters and art style clash greatly when confined to this dramatic color scheme. I would like to see a more balanced combination of the two, but as it is, the pieces are quite jarring. Overall, Jeannie shows a lot of potential for the future as long as she continues to experiment with her art and develop her art style more. I'm excited for when she is comfortable enough with the skills she's learning in class to combine them with her furry characters and stories. By seeing just how far she's come with her art over the years, it is clear that she's determined to, and capable of, improving her art more and more. But for now, she has her cute OCs and interesting art that definitely make her worth checking out and supporting. Next, I'd like to talk about Phil at the Game. Phil also creates furry art, mainly related to his original comic Refugees. The story so far is that a ship full of anthropomorphic creatures crash lands on Earth, full of injured refugees from some conflict not yet explained in the comic. There has been a heavy focus on character interactions, and there are definitely a lot of characters interacting. Therefore, it's helpful that Phil has been creating numerous simple character drawings with more information about them in their respective descriptions. Most of these drawings feature the character in front of a simple background with their own unique expression and resting pose. The anatomy of these characters is typically good, with specific issues to each picture. The only constant issues are more subjective, but bothersome nonetheless. The way Phil draws knees includes the top of the kneecap often breaking the shape of the legs. What I mean by that is the joint of the leg looks to be pushed forward to an extreme amount, which does not fit the character's otherwise resting position. If you want to show the shape of the knee in drawings like these, I'd suggest only the bottom line and keeping it disconnected so it's clear that the leg is straight down and not bent. Another issue is the inconsistencies regarding the fur of these characters. Most of them have only cheek fur, which makes the smooth tails look especially weird. These characters are also refugees, so it's logical that along with their injuries they would have scraggly fur and hair instead of the smooth, uninterrupted line art present in most of the drawings. Besides that, these drawings are informative and help to immerse you in the story. However, there are some some similar drawings mixed in that aren't character sheets, but keep the stiff pose and simple background aspect. These are mainly snapshot pieces which have a small scene in the description. I really like the idea of snapshots because it makes readers more interested in knowing how all these different scenes are connected. They have the potential to be more artistically detailed than the comic, focusing on the atmosphere of the piece and visually exploring the character and the situation surrounding them. However, Phil doesn't do this in his snapshots. As I previously said, he maintains the strategy of head-on characters with simple backgrounds. I would definitely encourage more experimentation with these snapshots, especially since many panels of the comic have more interesting poses and expressions. Staying on the topic of the comic, it has a lot of issues that are perpetuated in Phil's other artwork, the main one being the simple backgrounds because many of them are solid colored with little details. There are some exceptions, but most of them are one color that overpowers the characters in the scene. The oversaturated colors are also a problem, especially with the primary colors. The soldiers, water, and some furry characters have an extreme shade of blue that exists in his recent art as well, but it looks far too harsh in all of these places. The colors red and yellow also have these effects, and I would greatly encourage building color schemes based in less saturated colors, like here and here. I also mentioned that the comic has many more poses, but they are all still a little stiff. His recent works have improved in that regard, so I believe continuing on his current path, as well as experimenting with forms and poses, will help his art look more natural. Overall, Phil the Game has an interesting concept on his hands. Stories with furries are nothing new, but bringing furries to a faithfully realistic Earth is an interesting concept, and I'm excited to see how all the characters will react to each other and their new surroundings. Phil excels at character designs as well, so with a little more attention to the environments he puts them in and the character art itself, he could definitely create a fantastic comic. That being said, Phil told me that he plans on working more with the story of refugees and he hopes to restart it by the end of the year. So now is an excellent time to check him out, look around at his gallery so far, and get excited for where he takes his comic next. Moving on, let's take a look at Judith9123, also known as Jody. Jody mainly focuses on character drawings, occasionally having simple to intricate backgrounds accompanying them. Her art has a cute style, likely taking inspiration from anime. However, her style has developed subtly during her time on DeviantArt, mainly in the way she colors and shades her pieces. Originally, she had very faint shading, switching between soft and cell. Over 2018, Jody began using primarily soft shading, only placing it in certain areas, giving different textures to different pieces. She also began using colored line art, which would blend into the colors and make softly shaded areas look like polished 3D shapes. Using both of these techniques together, Jody began using very light, even soft shading on clothes and skin, and more detailed and textured soft shading on the hair and other details. Having the line art colored with these types of shading made some of the pieces appear lineless, but there wasn't enough contrast to make the images pop. In October 2018, she darkened the line art and shading, fixing this issue. She also added stronger highlights as she continued, especially to the hair. At the end of 2018 and the beginning of 2019, Jody began drawing full illustrations, with interesting poses for sometimes multiple characters. The shading for most of the artwork remained soft and light, with her style of shading hair still evolving. Over 2019, much of her art remained the same, with her creating many pieces with unique characters and poses. In May, she developed a secondary style with thicker colored line art and dramatic cell shading. At the same time, she implemented much darker soft shading in her main style, as well as a highlight across the character's hair. She then began using more texture brushes, again blending the colors into the line art and adding more definition to the hair. Recently, the line art was darkened again, as was the shading itself. This creates a very interesting effect on her art and makes some of the places besides the hair and eyes look unfinished. This makes her art very jarring, especially here when the completely lineless background confuses the style even more. I would suggest using the same style of shading throughout the piece, but the unique texture given to only the hair is something I haven't really seen and I think should be preserved. But I believe combining the more cell-type shading used in her second style with the lighter soft shading used previously would create a level of complexity fitting the hair. This would better unify the piece, and depending on the outcome, she could once again experiment with how to color her line art. With the shading out of the way, I'd like to talk about the interesting anatomy present in her art. Oftentimes, in a single picture, there will be instances of one limb being too rigid, with another being curved and naturally. Either of these could work if developed into a proper style, but having both is very distracting. Recently, her torsos and arms have gotten shorter in comparison to the rest of the body, and I believe compensating for that is where a lot of the inconsistency is stemming from. If she doesn't do it already, I would suggest drawing the form of the body first, with one trapezoid for the shoulders and ribcage, another trapezoid for the pelvis, and circles for the limb joints. Then have straight lines connecting the joints, ensuring that none of the limbs will be curved. This will also make it easier to see the length of each limb segment, allowing you to make adjustments until the limbs have matching lengths. The hands on these characters are the next biggest issue, with thin curled shapes ending in pointy tips that are too small to match the proportions of the piece. This is definitely a stylistic choice, but it is sometimes so extreme to the point of causing a distraction within the piece. I believe these hands could work stylistically at some points, but I do have some tips for improving the way hands are drawn in general. It is often more appealing to have a curve connecting the thumb and pointer finger as opposed to segmenting the thumb. The palm is also typically square or circle shaped, with the fingers positioned on a slight curve around the top as opposed to straight across. I would also suggest sketching the segments of each finger as a basis while positioning them, as this will improve the final results. Back to Judy's art as a whole, I found her journey through the past years very fascinating as she took leaps and bounds through experimentation, resulting in very unique textures and effects in her artwork. She does have some strange anatomy in places, but each overall piece easily manages to be cute and appealing. I would also like to point out her excellent use of colors in not only her character designs, but also her illustrations in general. It makes her art very pleasant to look at and has only gotten better over the years. I'm very excited to see where her art will go next, and you should be too. The last artist I'd like to talk about today is Angst the Emo Avenger, also known as Mikey. Mikey primarily draws simple animal characters, usually based on Pokemon or warrior cats. They use soft shading and will oftentimes overlay textures for fur. I find this use of texture very interesting, and for the most part they've gotten much better at following the form of the body when placing it. However, when this is combined with the bare bones soft shading, the texture looks too realistic in comparison. There are some instances where there is a texture without shading, such as here and here. I think they are very visually impressive, but that is also because the simple style works very well with bright colors, especially here and here. But the combination of these elements is still distracting and could be improved upon. There's definitely lots of experimental combinations possible, and I have a couple suggestions for where to start. Putting the texture in only specific places, such as the shaded areas, would add more depth to the piece and remain unrealistic enough to match the cartoony style. Using different shading methods could further develop this, such as using hatching to imply the texture of fur, but keeping it in the areas that are shaded. Cell shading is also a good technique for simple lined artwork and may help define the core of the style better. Whatever they choose to do, it's important to keep experimenting with and improving art styles. Focusing back on their current artwork, Mikey has an interesting issue regarding the anatomy of cats they draw. While Mikey is good at drawing the profile of cats standing, they have a habit of elongating the legs when they are bent. The anatomy of their sitting cats is excellent, but only where the body is concerned. The issue with their cat anatomy is almost solely dependent on whether the head is turned or facing forward. While the necks and heads of the drawings have many problems throughout, these problems look much more severe when the head is facing forward or in 3/4 view. The heads are drawn with the fur and chin completely connected, literally separating the forward-facing heads from their bodies. This can work well in some drawings, but I think drawing the cats like this ruins the flow of the drawing and therefore makes the proportions issue worse. You can also see this in the chest fur of this piece, which makes the body look like it's in segments. On the other hand, the turned heads have an open connection to the rest of the body, forcing Mikey to see the connection better and be more aware of the proportions. However, this also causes the necks to become elongated and more curved, instead of having the bulky necks of the forward-facing cats. I would suggest opening the areas between the chin and cheek fur to increase the flow of the front-facing cats, and make sure to pay extra attention to the necks when they're drawing a cat looking from the side. Moving on from the anatomy, I'd like to talk more about their complete illustrations. There are a lot of badge-type drawings with a headshot and simple circle background, but they use this as an inspiration for many of their other backgrounds. This method fits their cute, simple style very well, which directly juxtaposes how out of place their characters look in realistic, lineless environments. This goes back to the issue of texture on the characters. It is an interesting technique that could be developed into something better, but it currently doesn't fit together very well. When having lined characters, it's a good idea to have lined backgrounds too, therefore giving continuity to the piece. But once again, it's important to experiment with many different combinations. Before I leave, I'd like to address this piece specifically. There's a lot going on, and it suffers from a lot of the issues I've already mentioned, especially in this panel. Too large head, awkward bent arm, mismatched background and character. I would like to point out that it does follow my suggestion to keep the chin and cheek fur disconnected, and I think it makes the flow and proportions of this cat much more balanced. This piece also shows another issue with the simple soft shading, which is a lack of depth in the piece. Having drastically darker or drastically lighter areas with a blend in between can be very beneficial to a drawing, especially here where Soul is supposed to be very dramatically backlit. Having one solid dark shade and one dramatic rim highlight is bold, but still looks flat. I would therefore suggest adding darker and darker shading in increasingly more specific areas until the contrast is much more extreme. This should also be done to a lesser extent in the other panels because again, the characters look flat. But overall, Angst the Emo Avenger has a lot of great work to check out, especially if you like warrior cats and or Pokemon. A lot of their techniques are very interesting, and I'm excited to see how their art develops next. That's all I have for now, but creating this video was such a fun and interesting process that I'm excited to do it again. I also hope it helps the artist in the video and the artist watching to improve their art, as well as help each other improve in the future. Criticism can be hard to give and even harder to take, but the most important part of it is respect. So I encourage you to go to the galleries of the artists shown in this video and give them lots of comments on how to improve, but also even more about how awesome they are already. After all, if you're going to witch hunt someone, you might as well kill them with kindness. Thank you everyone, I'll see you next time with an open mind.